Y'all kind of got my spiel last time about I'm really passionate about teaching these Disciple Your Kids sessions because having done youth ministry first with junior high school kids. So let's say I got to work with the kids on the other end of the parenting stage. Like I got to see that stage, and now to go backwards and start over with little bitty kids, it made me want to reverse engineer the type of junior high school kids that I worked with, that I saw had positive relationships, both with me and the pastors and their parents. And I want that. I want those good scenarios that I got to work with, because it didn't just happen. So I want to kind of look back and what should I do? So tonight's topic, last time we talked about family worship. And if you're watching this recording and you haven't watched the family worship one, you might want to go back and watch that one first, because I'll be mentioning some things we talked about in there. But this one specifically, we're talking about answering kids' questions. And I'm at the beginning stage. Personally, I'm at the beginning stages of answering kids' questions. Everything is why, and where is Jesus right now? And it's like it's kind of, honestly, it's like the funny questions that kids ask about God that you should really write down and like refer back to later. I've also been on the far other side of this, where kids are asking those big, scary questions. They're about to leave for high school or for college, and they're asking like these really deep, intense questions. And so like I've got experience with both. And so I'm kind of, I guess I'm doing a bait and switch tonight, guys, because I'm going to give you some tools at the very end on some specifics of how to answer questions. But the biggest thing I want to cover tonight is the fear of when kids ask you a tough question. So if you would like to jump in with your response to this, what is your unfiltered internal response when your kid asks a question? I'm going to take a sip of water so someone has to answer.
I'll go. Okay, so my first thought when I read that question was simply because the Bible said so. I can always go that route, and then I can always kind of quickly Google something on that topic that may be asked. And then I can find a quote, a verse from that kind of is parallel to what is questioned. Right. As far as like digging more into that, and I guess having more references or theological why, the Bible said so. So that's my automatic response for sure.
Yeah, for sure. It's a little bit of a humorous thing, but I think a lot of times we get this deer in the headlights response when kids ask a question. So like thinking back to, 22-year-old me with my first youth group, when youth would ask me a question, I would feel like I was trapped. If God is good, why do bad things happen? Like I always felt like I was right there in the moment. There is an internal pressure to respond right away. And Patty, I'm actually really glad that you already brought up, looking for resources and seeking other sources, because that's exactly where we're headed. So I've got a few quotes here. Henry Ford: anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. Oh, can I not? Oh, I lost my ability to switch my slides. Give me 1 second. There we go. So the point I want to make here is model lifelong learning. Right now, there's a trend on TikTok and probably some other places as too, podcasts, other social media platforms, to deconstruct the Christian faith. They're even hashtagging it like ex-evangelical and deconstruction or something like that. And so I think the point I want to make here is that we want to show our kids to be lifelong learners by expressing excitement when they come up with questions. If you imagine that your faith, even as an adult, is always under construction, there's nothing to deconstruct because you've got the tools in your hand and you're still building. So I think that I think is probably, if there was one thing I wanted you to take away from the talk tonight, it's that the best thing you can do to answer your kids' questions is to marvel at them, to be excited that they're asking a question, because it's going to lead to discovery, not only for them, but for both of you. Next point, Benjamin Franklin, tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. So the point there is allow older kids to find answers with you. I think when we allow kids as young as possible to at least watch us find answers, and I know at least for half of us on this call, our kids are like too young for this step, which is kind of sad. But especially Patty and Jennifer, y'all's kids are getting to that age where you can involve them in discovering the answers, and they will learn more from walking alongside you as you find the answer than they will from actually the answer to their specific question. They might not even remember your specific answer, but they will remember you looking for answers. And then as they get older and they have a question and you're not around, they'll know where to go to find those answers. Or they'll go, oh, I've seen my mom search on, Blue Letter Bible before, or she pulls, this maroon book off the shelf. I'm going to check that out. If you sat in on any of my Study the Bible classes, I know Amanda at least has sat in on a couple of those. That's essentially what I was doing there, but with adults. I was just, showing my screen as I researched something, and it wasn't exciting or thrilling, but you were walking away learning how to find your own answers. That's kind of the objective there. Albert Einstein, got a couple of those. It's not that I'm so smart. It's just that I stay with problems longer and I have no special talents. I'm only passionately curious. If you watch any of the top 10 TED Education, TED Talks, most of them are actually about this topic, that in order for true learning to occur, all the top 10, they're either going to be about how relationship is needed for learning or about curiosity preceding learning. And I just assume that there's relationship already happening, which is why there's not a slide for that, because you're the parent. You already have one of the greatest tools for helping them find answers to questions. So this other piece, curiosity, basically the point here is that if your kid asks you a question, if you can, just mentally reframe that question in your mind to be, Mom, Dad, I am ready to learn about blank. And we teach our kids a lot of things. Like, we teach them a lot of things. But if curiosity, if their question precedes that lesson, they're going to internalize it far better than most other things that we're going to teach them in any given day. So curiosity precedes learning. And then final one from an author you may or may not have heard of. We learn more by looking for the answer to a question and not finding it than we do from learning the answer itself. And that kind of leads to my final big point, that God is bigger. So I actually love that I've got some Concordia, Texas grads on the call. Whoosh. Yeah, can we get a good whoosh? Yeah, whoosh, Concordia, Texas. Joel Heck, one of the professors, used to say, a brilliant guy, by the way, one of the foremost authorities on C.S. Lewis in the world. And he would say, if God was so small that I could understand him, I'm not sure I'd believe in him. And so this is a guy whose intelligence is like way above, way up here. But I think one of the great things we model to our kids when we react appropriately to their questions is that we show them it's okay to be dwarfed by an almighty God. Sometimes we should ask questions that our finite minds cannot wrap around. And so That's why I get back to how you answer when your kid, so your kid asks a question and you stand there and that question seems intimidating. If you can just run through in your mind, their curiosity is preceding learning. I can involve them in finding the answer. God is bigger and we're going to learn this together. The outcome, the actual answer to that question matters so much less than how your attitude is toward them in that moment. So when your kid asks you that big scary question, Mom, Dad, why do bad things happen? Or I have a friend who is a boy and says he likes other boys, and when they get much older and hey, I'm thinking about moving in with my girlfriend, my boyfriend, like, what do you think about that? Like, whatever the scariest scenario is in your parenting mind, because parents, we all have them, no matter what stage our kids are at, we all have some big scary question that we feel that we may be asked in the future. Our response matters less than our attitude in the moment. And if we can just believe that God is going to be with us, that he's going to use their curiosity to actually learn something together, we're going to be okay. So that kind of leads us here. Asking questions about faith does not equal questioning faith. And this is actually something that I didn't understand when I first got into youth ministry. I would always get into this panic mode whenever kids would ask really hard questions. And, the harder the questions, the more I felt like I was on the spot and I had to answer in the moment. And usually my answers in the moment were awful. And sometimes I had to backtrack on them later. But what I learned as I went on is that the kids who now, 8 or 10 years later, are the strongest in their faith are the ones who back then were asking the toughest questions. So remember how we were talking about, the theme of deconstructing faith is trending on social media. I think that's happening because of a generation of kids that was maybe given, here's the answer, instead of being given the tools for answering their own questions. So we want to model that lifelong learning so that our kids' faith is always under construction and not deconstruction. So when you see those big, scary questions, I don't want you to have the moment. I want you to be like, okay, come on, buddy, let's do this. Last time, if you were in that session, I think everybody was, we talked about raising resilient disciples. That Barna research looked into, that I think 30-something% of kids who went to church in high school and remained in the church when they were independent, when they were on their own. And they defined those kids as resilient disciples. Those kids were raised in spiritually vibrant households, and they had 3 markers for a spiritually vibrant household. So spiritual practices, they prayed every day or two, read the Bible weekly, spiritual conversations, talking about God as a family, at least weekly all together. And we talked about how those first 2 bullet points are actually covered and given opportunity to happen in family worship. And tonight's topic, really, we're talking about those spiritual conversations, how to be prepared for spiritual conversations. That final one, hospitality, we're still planning to teach on that, but I don't have that session planned just yet, sadly. Another thing I want to review from last time, because I think this is really important, is it worth it? Is it worth it to be mentally prepared before those hard questions come up? And Barna research also reported that majority of practicing Christians became Christians usually before 12 years old. So if you have, a minor living in your home, in your care, you have a huge opportunity to impact them and their walk with Jesus for the rest of their life. So absolutely worth it. High return on investment for having those spiritual conversations with our kids. I also want to review the leadership square. Discipline and disciple come from the same root, which is simply to teach. So the leadership square starts out with, I do, you watch. And then, sorry, y'all's pictures are like blocking half of my screen. So I've kind of got a dual screen set up. That's why I keep looking to the side. I do you help, and that's kind of up to about age 12 when we'll translate this into asking questions. So when Flint asks a question, I might show him that I'm going to open the Bible to answer his question. So I do, he watches. As he gets a little bit older, up to age 12, I might hand him the Bible and say, oh, actually, that's in John 3:16. Here, you know how to find John. We'll find it together. And then as they get into upper high school, or junior high and upper high school, you can start getting into those other quadrants of the leadership square where you do, I help, and you do, I encourage. So I want to give it's kind of easy to give examples of those earlier parts of the leadership square. I'm actually going to give a really positive example from my parents, who at the time I'm not sure they wouldn't have said they know what they're doing, but they actually did a very good job. So when I was in upper high school, I think my senior year, I started writing a research paper for like a dual credit English class on the difference between the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which is the denomination I was part of at the time, and the other big one, which was the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which is what I'm now a part of. And I wanted to look at the difference between those two, mainline Lutheran denominations. And through the course of my research, I actually discovered that I didn't believe a lot of the things that were confessed by my present church, and I did believe a lot of the things happening over here. And so throughout this, 6-week process of writing this paper, my parents really did a good job of balancing, you do, I help. I was doing the research, I was doing the work, and they were helping me by asking more good questions and helping me find good resources. And more often, because of my age, they were just encouraging me, like, continue to look into this. You're doing a good job. It sounds like you're being thorough. So, long story short, I ended up where I am today. I'm very thankful for that. But if they had come down, and tried to say, well, we're going to do this research and you're going to come along for the ride, I'm not sure it would have had such a lifelong impact on me. So that's how the leadership square can apply to asking or answering questions that parents, it's not all on you. Depending on your kid's age, you actually should be involving them in finding those answers. And it takes some of the pressure off, which is really nice. So this is kind of the last part that I wanted to get to, which is where I actually give you useful tools. So if your kid asks you a question when you first wake up in the morning and you haven't had your coffee and they're like, where do babies come from? And what's Jesus say about this? Like, you've actually got some useful, actionable things in your tool belt. So here we go. Tool number 1, a study Bible. Footnotes are friends. So this is my study Bible, and I've had it for a few years. I've put a lot of wear on it. I like the Lutheran Study Bible put out by Concordia Publishing House. It's got really good footnotes at the bottom of the page. If you are not familiar with how to use a study Bible, or you do not have one, be sure to let me know. And we have a stash of them. We want to make sure that every household that we're associated with, associated with Lazarus Church and beyond, has a study Bible, because the footnotes at the bottom of the page, more often than not, when you're reading something and you're like, that does not make sense, at least for me, 70 to 80% of the time, I at least get some really helpful clues that allow me to move forward from just the little footnotes at the bottom of the page. So that's kind of the first tool that I go for when it's a question about the Bible. The second thing I want to talk about is the Catechism. And I actually intended to pull this up, but I'll send this out to all of you in the call. If you're watching the recording of this, shoot me an email or send me a message or text or something, or I guess you can just comment right on the video. And I'll send you the link to access the Catechism online. I actually didn't know the whole thing was up there, but what's cool about the Catechism, there's an app version too. I've got a paper version because I'm kind of old school, but Martin Luther was a reformer of the church, and he actually was on to something a long time ago that we're addressing today, that curiosity precedes learning. So the whole catechism, the way it's written, is question and answer response. So, trying to find a good one. So the Apostles' Creed, the section on the Apostles' Creed, we say the Apostles' Creed every Sunday. So if your kid asks you, what is the Apostles' Creed? Well, what do you know? That's the first question. Or actually, the first question is, what's a creed? And it just says a creed's a statement of what we believe, teach, and confess. And it's got a scripture reference. And another question it asks is, why do we say I believe and not we believe? And there's the answer to that. Why is it called the Apostles' Creed? Is it written by the apostles? These are all just verbatim questions that are already in here. And tell me if that does not sound like something a kid would ask. So the Catechism is a really amazing tool, and I'll make sure you'll have an access to the online and the app versions. And then if you would like a paper version, because I'm pretty analog, I really like paper, we'll be happy to get you that too. The third tool, in fact, here I wrote down in my notes the link to the Catechism. It's just catechism.cph.org. But the app was actually pretty user-friendly. Tool 3, blueletterbible.org. This is my favorite website for going to and digging deeper into a specific passage of scripture. It also has study tools and commentaries and things like that. I will send these in an email to you guys afterwards, so you don't have to worry about copying down links. But I plan to offer it again, probably after the summer, my Study the Bible study series. In that series, I actually teach you how to use Blue Letter Bible and make it a very usable tool, because it's a very powerful free tool that's just out there on the internet that allows you to study the Bible in like a million different versions. You can break it down into the Greek or Hebrew, and it'll go word for word, and you can look like you really know what you're talking about, but it's all just right there. The last tool I want to talk about, and it's the last one because I think for 99.9% of the questions your kids are going to ask, you can answer them with these first 3 tools. But the fourth tool is you can always phone a theologian. I'm always here. I'm happy to tell you, wow, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer, but I'll get back to you. If you've ever asked me a question, like, that's probably exactly what I told you. But I do. I really love researching, and I've actually learned so much about God and following him just through answering other people's questions. So I actually really love them. I've still got a lady at my previous congregation who every once in a while, just like out of the blue, she'll text me. I should have probably pulled up one of the questions she's asked me, but they are like really hard, thought-provoking questions, and I always learn something. So yeah, so those are your tools. I want to review them again. Study Bible, head there first. Catechism, I'll send you the link for that. blueletterbible.org, and phone your family-friendly theologian. The last thing I kind of want to review is how adults perceive questions versus how kids perceive them. I don't know if it's just where we are in life and that hard things have happened and the world's not all sunshine and roses, but for adults, the way we view questions, and if you're in any kind of work question or in any kind of work context, you know that if you are asked a question, an answer is expected and it's going to be right or wrong. Questions are stigmatized. So if you have to ask a supervisor a question, like it's almost kind of like I don't want to act as though I don't know what I'm doing. It's kind of like a threat to intelligence or authority. If you're questioning somebody, that's a threat to their authority. If they're asking you a question and you don't know, it's like a threat to your intelligence. And when you come to the answer, that's the end, discussion over. And I just want to kind of remind us of what it was like when we were kids. when we were kids and we asked questions, questions were exploration, they were discovery, they were exciting, questions were a door to discovering a new thing, a new part of the world. And often that led to more questions and more learning because we're just eating it up. We understood that there was more to the world than we can understand. And so parents, as you think about, being addressed by your kids with these questions, try to get into that childhood mind frame that you had, that a question is the beginning, an answer is the beginning. It's exciting, it's fun, there's no stigma to questions. That's not a threat to intelligence or authority. Your kids are saying, hey, I have curiosity about this. I am ready to learn about this. So kind of wrapping us up here, answering kids' questions is less about content and more about context. The best thing you can do is create an environment in your house where questions are welcome, that questions are not something that you respond to right away, and here's your script, parents, steal mine. That's a really good question. I can't wait to dig into the answer. And if they're old enough, I can't wait to dig into the answer with you. The way you answer a question is less about content, less about the actual answer to the question, and more about the context. Is your home, is your environment one that affirms their curiosity about God and faith and living as a follower of Jesus? And how can you promote that, even when it means you have to say, wow, I don't know. Like, your kid will not look down on you for not knowing the answer to a big question. I guarantee, especially as they get older, they will have so much respect for you thoughtfully responding, I don't know. That's a wonderful question. Let's find out. So parents, you got this. If you didn't know, this was just like your, dun, 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 like get pumped up. Self-evaluation questions. If you want, you can take a picture of these. I can also send them out on the follow-up email, just so you can kind of start thinking about what is the context, what is the context of our home, what is the environment I'm creating in our home for questions, for those of you with younger kids, before those big questions even come up. What's your gut reaction when asking a question? This one's just, a self-awareness type thing. Like for me, as a young youth minister, I had to finally come to grips and admit, I feel threatened when I don't have the answer, because I should know. I'm a theologian. I have a degree. Like, I'm an adult. Like, I should know. But that self-awareness and just admitting, like, oh, that's a pride thing. It helps you get over it. So put words to that gut reaction, that, the scary monster of a question comes out. What's your reaction? And then what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, literally, anytime I have like a ministry coach that I talk to sometimes, and often I'll be spilling out like, oh, this is so horrible. I don't know what's going to go on. And she'll ask, okay, spell it out for me. What's the worst thing that can happen? And very often that monster that we've created is not a monster at all. So go ahead and put into words. And what happens is when you put into words, and this is probably a review for anybody who's had a psychology class before, when our right brain gets involved, lots of emotions, a lot of times we're thinking through worst case scenarios. But when we actually put it into words and it comes out of our mouth, we're making our left brain, the analytical side, get involved. And we're making both sides of our brain cooperate. And a lot of times that takes those heightened emotions and brings them down to midline. Just by using words, it makes your brain, the two hemispheres, communicate. So that's a great thing to do. And then you get to the fun part, which is, what is the context we want to create? What is the environment we want to create? What do I want my reaction to be when my kid asks a question? And you can take my script and make it into your own words, but maybe think through, this is how I'm going to respond. I'm going to say, wow, that's a really good question. I don't know, but we'll find out the answer together, you know? So that is kind of the end of what I wanted to share with you guys. I'm